Tokyo is home to 40 million people, yet its pedestrian fatality rate per capita is roughly 1/3 of New York City's. Japan's rail network moves 30 billion passengers a year, with average delay time being under 1 minute. America has spent $4.6 trillion on highway infrastructure since 1956, and transit ridership in most US cities is still below 1970 levels. Picture two streets, one in Kyoto, narrow, quiet, storefronts at ground level, apartments above, a shrine tucked between a bakery and a dry cleaner. One in suburban Phoenix, 6 lanes wide, no shade, sidewalks that end without warning, a parking lot where a neighborhood should be. Same post-war era, same planet. Entirely different logic. This is not about Japan being dense or culturally different. It is about a legal decision. America made in 1926 that Japan never made. And once you see what that decision built, you cannot unsee any of it. In 2022, 42,795 people died on American roads. That same year, Japan recorded 2,610 road deaths. Adjusted for population, American roads kill at nearly 3 times the rate. And that gap has been documented for decades. This is not a temporary anomaly. It is a structural feature. The commute tells the same story. The average American commute time has increased over the past 30 years, even as the country poured trillions into additional highway capacity. The Texas A&M Transportation Institute's Urban Mobility Report has tracked this pattern year after year. More lanes, longer delays, higher costs. The expansion does not fix the problem. It feeds it. In Tokyo, 51% of daily trips are made by rail or transit. In Los Angeles, that figure is under 4%. But this is not a population argument. Osaka's metropolitan area holds 19 million people, more than Houston, Dallas, and Miami combined. Osaka has measurably lower traffic congestion, measured by delay hours per commuter, than any of those cities. When urban planning researchers at Smart Growth America ranked American cities for walkability improvement, the cities they named as most improved still scored below the median walkability of comparable Japanese metro areas. The gap is not closing. It is not a cultural quirk or a geographic accident. And the cities that have tried hardest to close it, the ones that built the rail lines and the bike lanes and the pedestrian plazas, keep running into the same wall they cannot quite name. That wall has a name. But to understand it, you have to first understand what makes Japanese streets look the way they do, and why that look is not an aesthetic choice. Walk down almost any commercial street in Osaka or Kyoto, and you will notice something that seems ordinary, but is actually legally unusual. Apartments sit directly above shops. A dry cleaner shares a wall with a dentist's office. A kindergarten occupies the second floor of a building whose ground level is a noodle restaurant. Nobody needed a special permit for any of that. It is simply what the zoning allows, and in many zones, expects. Japan operates under a system called Yuto Chiiki, a land use framework with 12 overlapping use categories. In most urban zones, ground floor commercial mixed with residential is not just permitted. It is the natural outcome. The street belongs to the people who live on it. In America, that arrangement is illegal in most cities. After the Supreme Court ruled in favor of single-use zoning in Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty Company in 1926, municipalities across the country began legally separating residential, commercial, and industrial uses into distinct zones. A corner grocery next to a house became a code violation. An apartment above a bakery required a variance. Entire neighborhoods were rezoned into single-function pods connected only by roads. And those roads were designed to a specific standard. The American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO, publishes a document called A Policy on Geometric Design of Highways and Streets, known as the Green Book. First issued in 1954, it defines lane widths, turning radii and sightline requirements optimized for vehicle throughput at speeds of 40 to 50 miles per hour. Those standards were applied not just to highways, but to streets running through neighborhoods, past schools, beside storefronts. The result is what urban designers call the stroad. Too fast to function as a street, too interrupted by signals and driveways to function as a road. A design that serves neither pedestrians nor through traffic well, but that emerged directly from applying highway engineering logic to urban space. That is not bad luck. That is the zoning code and the Green Book working exactly as they were designed. In 2019, a transit planner named Lahela Matson left Honolulu for Osaka. She had been selected for a US-Japan Urban Fellowship, and for 2 years, she worked inside Osaka's city planning office, watching how the system actually functioned at the level of individual blocks. What she found was not glamorous. It was bureaucratic. A single block in Namba District, Osaka's dense commercial core, legally contained a kindergarten, 3 restaurants, 2 apartment towers, a dry cleaner, and a shrine. No special approval, no design review board, no variance process. The mixed-use block existed because the zoning expected it to. The legal default produced the walkable outcome. When Matson returned to Honolulu in 2021, she brought back a specific proposal. The Skyline Rail Line, Honolulu's first rapid transit corridor, had just begun its opening phase. The line had been in planning for over 2 decades. Its projected total cost was $12.4 billion, and the neighborhoods it was being built to connect were ones where residents still could not safely walk to a grocery store, let alone a station. Matson proposed eliminating minimum parking requirements along 2 transit corridors served by the Skyline line. The reasoning was direct, requiring new buildings near rail stations to include parking guarantees the car-dependent pattern around those stations. You cannot build a walkable neighborhood if the code mandates the space that makes walking unnecessary. The proposal reached the Honolulu City Council Planning Committee. In public testimony in March 2023, Matson cited a specific AASHTO standard requiring 12-foot wide lanes on feeder roads leading to the stations, wider than most arterials in central Tokyo. The committee killed the proposal. The stated reason was traffic impact concerns. As of 2024, the walk score for most Skyline station areas sits below 40. A walk score under 50 is classified as car dependent. The city spent $12.4 billion building train stations surrounded by parking lots in neighborhoods where you still need a car to reach the train. Here is what happened after 1926. The Euclidean zoning ruling gave municipalities the legal authority to segregate land uses, but segregated uses require connections. Connections require roads, and roads needed a design standard. Aishada's Green Book became that standard. First issued in 1954, it encoded specific lane widths, turning radii and design speeds into a document that states and cities used, and still use, to design every road that receives federal funding. The logic was vehicle throughput. Cars needed to move efficiently. The standard optimized for that goal. The funding mechanism made it mandatory in practice, even when it was technically optional. Under Highway Trust Fund rules established through the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, states and cities that accepted federal road money were expected to build to ASHTO specifications. Deviation risked liability. Deviation could jeopardize future allocations. So engineers defaulted to the Green Book, on arterials, on collector roads, on neighborhood streets, on roads that had no business being designed for 45 miles per hour throughput. The parking mandates have an equally specific origin. In 1946, the Institute of Traffic Engineers published a manual establishing minimum parking requirements based on vehicle trip generation rates. Those rates were calculated from a small number of studies conducted almost entirely in low-density suburban sites in Florida. That methodology, from one state in one era, became the national template. The ITE's Trip Generation Manual, now in its 11th edition, is still cited in active zoning codes across the country. The core data underpinning those requirements comes from studies conducted between 1960 and 1980 at sites chosen specifically because they were already car-oriented. America determined how much parking every building should require by studying parking lots and calling the result a standard. Congressional testimony during the 1955 and 1956 Interstate Highway Act debates documents the coordinated advocacy of General Motors, Ford, the American Petroleum Institute, and the Highway Construction Lobby for the funding formulas that followed. The Highway Trust Fund, those debates produced, directed the dominant share of federal transportation investment toward roads. That structure has remained largely intact for nearly 70 years. Japan, rebuilding after the war, took a different path. Its land use framework preserved dense, mixed-use block patterns that had defined its cities for generations. It never adopted ITE-style national parking minimums. It never applied highway speed design standards to neighborhood streets. The gap between a Tokyo side street and a Phoenix arterial is not culture. It is what each government decided to legally require. The people responsible for American transportation policy were not unaware of what the system was producing. In 1974, the Federal Highway Administration produced an internal report warning that AASHTO lane width standards were being applied inappropriately to urban streets, and that the result was increased pedestrian danger. The report identified the specific mismatch between highway speed design and city environments. It did not change the standard. In 1991, Congress passed the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, ISTIA, which for the first time gave states flexibility to redirect some highway funds toward transit. It was a partial opening, but the core highway trust fund structure remained, and the dominant allocation stayed with roads. In 1997, TA-21 allowed federal transportation dollars to be used for bike and pedestrian infrastructure for the first time in meaningful amounts. Highway spending still consumed more than 80% of trust fund disbursements. The door opened a crack. The money stayed on the highway side. By 2010, the National Complete Streets Coalition had documented a specific structural problem. 22 states still maintained AASHTO compliance clauses in their design manuals that legally blocked road diets, the process of removing a travel lane to add protected bike lanes or widened sidewalks on any road that had received federal funding. Cities that wanted narrower, safer streets on their own blocks could not always build them because the federal money that paid for those blocks came with design obligations attached. In 2016, the Federal Highway Administration issued formal guidance explicitly stating that AASHTO standards are not mandatory on local roads. Most state departments of transportation ignored it. The reason was liability. If an accident occurred on a road that deviated from AASHTO standards, the agency that approved the deviation faced legal exposure. The guidance gave permission. The liability structure made compliance the safer institutional choice. Parking minimums followed the same arc. Buffalo eliminated its citywide minimum parking requirements in 2017. Minneapolis eliminated them in 2021. Both were covered as landmarks. As of 2024, more than 90% of U.S. municipalities still maintain minimum parking requirements, many of them citing ITE manuals from 1987. In 2021, during the Invest in America Act markup, Congress considered a proposal to establish a separate urban street design standard that would replace the Green Book for city streets. The provision did not survive into the final bill. Every one of these moments was a point at which the system could have changed course. every one of them left the structural logic intact. Starting in 2014, New York City adopted Vision Zero, a traffic safety program imported from Sweden, built on the principle that road deaths are not accidents, but predictable, preventable outcomes of design choices. By 2019, the results were measurable. Pedestrian fatalities in New York City had fallen by roughly 40% from their 2013 baseline. Seattle adopted Vision Zero in 2015, San Francisco in 2014. The program worked where it was applied, and then the wall appeared again. Vision Zero gave New York City authority to redesign streets owned by the city. But state-controlled roads running through all 5 boroughs, managed by the New York State Department of Transportation, remained under state jurisdiction. The city could narrow its own streets. It could not touch the state roads. And the state roads, built to AASHTO standards, continued producing the majority of serious pedestrian injuries. The reform reached the city streets and stopped at the state line. The same ceiling appeared in Dallas. The DART Silver Line, a $2.1 billion light rail expansion, opened in 2024, was designed from the beginning with transit-oriented development as an explicit goal. Station areas were intended to become walkable, mixed-use corridors that would reduce car dependency along the line. The planning documents used all the right language. Then, the surrounding municipalities were asked to update their zoning codes. Parking minimums stayed in place. Setback requirements, rules mandating that new buildings be pulled back from the street edge by 20 feet or more, remained in the code. New development near the stations was built to car-oriented standards because car-oriented standards were still the law. The station areas, as they filled in, looked structurally similar to the auto-dependent corridors the Silver Line had been built to replace. You can build the train, but if the legal code surrounding the train still requires parking minimums and 20-foot setbacks, the outcome you studied in Osaka is not just unlikely, it is legally prevented. The Dallas fix did not fail because of poor intentions or weak ridership projections. It failed because transit infrastructure was inserted into a legal framework that still required every building around it to assume a car. Go back to the opening image. The empty sidewalk running beside a 6-lane road, the parking lot surrounding the brand new rail station, the stroad that stretches to both horizons, too wide and fast to walk beside, too interrupted by signals and curb cuts to drive through smoothly. These are not the remnants of a bad decade or the product of negligent planners. They are the physical residue of a 1926 Supreme Court decision that banned mixed-use neighborhoods, a 1946 traffic engineering manual built from parking lot data in Florida, and a 1956 federal funding formula that directed the country's transportation investment toward roads, each of them still operational in most American cities today. Japan did not stumble into walkable streets. It never legally prohibited the conditions that produced them. Its zoning system expected mixed use at the block level. Its street standards did not impose highway speed design on neighborhood roads. Its rail network developed inside a legal environment where the land surrounding stations could naturally become the kind of place that makes rail worth riding. America made different choices, specific choices, named choices, written into court decisions and congressional hearings and federal manuals that are still in print and still being cited in active zoning codes. When Lahela Matson testified before the Honolulu Planning Committee in March 2023, citing the AASHTO standard that required 12-foot lanes on roads leading to a $12.4 billion rail system, she was not describing a local failure. She was describing the final link in a 70-year chain, a chain in which every piece, the zoning code, the design manual, the funding formula, the liability clause, held the next one in place and called the whole arrangement normal. The comparison to Japan is clarifying because Japan does not look like a utopia. It looks like a country that simply never assembled the legal architecture that makes the American outcome the default. The stroad is not a mistake. It is the answer to a question America decided to ask in 1926, and it has never stopped answering.